After World War II, life in America began to change rapidly. Women who once stayed home to cook now worked outside the home, and families spent more time gathered around the television instead of the dinner table. Convenience became a priority, and food companies saw a huge opportunity. They began offering meals that were quick, easy, and cheap. Instead of spending hours in the kitchen, families could simply heat a meal and eat in minutes. But convenience came with a hidden cost. These new processed foods were filled with three powerful ingredients: salt, sugar, and fat. These weren't chosen by accident. They were chosen because people love them, crave them, and find it hard to resist them. These three ingredients slowly reshaped our diets, our health, and even our culture around food. Sugar was the first big weapon. Humans are naturally wired to love sweetness because it once signaled survival. Long ago, sweet foods gave us quick energy when food was scarce. In modern times, however, sugar became a cheap way for companies to make their products more tempting. Food scientists worked carefully to find what they called the bliss point, the exact level of sweetness that makes a food irresistible, without being overwhelming. Soon sugar was everywhere, not only in desserts and candy, but also in foods where it didn't seem to belong. Breakfast cereals aimed at children were often half sugar. Drinks like soda contained several teaspoons in a single can. Even pasta sauces were sweetened, with sugar often listed right after tomatoes as a main ingredient. On average, Americans were eating more than 20 teaspoons of sugar every single day. People knew it was unhealthy. Dentists saw children's teeth rotting from sugary cereals. Doctors warned that sugar contributed to diabetes and obesity. But instead of cutting back, food companies simply rebranded. Sugar Frosted Flakes became just Frosted Flakes. Marketing disguised the problem, and sales kept climbing. By the 1990s, soda sales had quadrupled compared to earlier decades, and obesity rates soared. Fat was the second part of the food industry's formula. Like sugar, humans naturally crave fat because it is calorie-dense and once helped us survive hard times. Unlike sugar, however, there seems to be no limit to how much fat we want. Experiments showed that people almost always preferred creamier, fattier versions of foods. Fat wasn't only appealing, it was useful for manufacturers. It made food last longer, gave it better texture, and made it look more attractive. Combined with sugar, fat became even harder to resist. That's why so many cookies, frozen meals, and snacks are loaded with both. By the end of the 20th century, Americans were eating far more fat than recommended, leading to heart disease, diabetes, and weight gain. Cheese became a special problem. Once a modest food, it exploded in popularity thanks to government policies and marketing. In the mid-20th century, the U.S. government guaranteed to buy excess dairy from farmers. When consumers shifted to low-fat milk, dairy producers were left with mountains of unused milk fat. They turned it into cheese, which the government stockpiled in massive amounts. At one point, the stockpile reached nearly 2 billion pounds. Eventually, campaigns encouraged Americans to eat more cheese, and consumption tripled. Today, cheese is one of the biggest sources of saturated fat in the American diet. Salt was the third key. While it contains no calories, salt makes food taste better, hides unpleasant flavors in processed products, and keeps food fresh longer. Unfortunately, too much salt raises blood pressure, leading to dangerous conditions like heart disease and stroke. By the 1980s, 1 in 4 Americans suffered from high blood pressure, and excessive salt was a major cause. The biggest surprise was that salt wasn't coming from the shaker at home. It was coming from processed foods: soups, sauces, frozen meals, canned goods, and fast food. A single frozen dinner could contain more than twice the recommended daily amount of sodium. And like sugar, salt has a flexible bliss point. The more you eat, the more you crave. The food industry had little reason to cut back. Attempts at healthier change often failed. Some companies tried lowering the amount of salt or sugar in their products. Campbell's, for example, reduced the sodium in its soups, but when customers noticed a drop in flavor, sales plunged, and the company raised sodium levels again. Kraft tried a broad health campaign, limiting unhealthy ingredients and improving labeling, yet consumers ignored the healthier options and kept buying the saltier, sweeter, fattier foods. Governments in other countries had more success. Britain encouraged companies to voluntarily reduce sodium, which is believed to have saved thousands of lives. Finland labeled salty foods with clear warnings, combined with public education campaigns. As a result, deaths from heart disease and stroke dropped dramatically. These examples showed that change was possible, but it required leadership and public will. In the United States, however, industry pressure and consumer demand made change difficult. The Department of Agriculture often appeared more interested in protecting the meat and dairy industries than protecting public health. Consumers said they wanted healthier options but bought the opposite. Food companies knew they could not survive without giving people what they craved: more salt, more sugar, more fat. The truth is uncomfortable. The food industry gives us what we ask for. And we keep asking for the very things that harm us. This cycle has fueled epidemics of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and other preventable illnesses. The costs are not only personal but also social, with billions spent every year on healthcare related to diet-driven diseases. So what is the way forward? The most effective answer is simple, though not easy. Stop relying on processed food. When we prepare our own meals from fresh ingredients, we control what goes in and what stays out. Cooking at home avoids the traps of hidden sugar, excessive fat, and dangerous levels of salt. Even if time is short, preparing meals in larger batches and freezing portions can make home cooking practical again. This isn't about following strict diets or giving up every indulgence. It's about recognizing how the food industry has shaped our habits and reclaiming control. When we choose real food over processed products, we are not only protecting our health but also sending a message to the companies that profit from our cravings. In the end, salt, sugar, fat is a wake-up call. It reminds us that our taste buds are being manipulated. Our choice is guided by hidden formulas and our health traded for convenience. But it also gives us hope change is possible if we are willing to cook more, eat more natural foods, and resist the addictive pull of salt, sugar, and fat.